Listen up, ladies and gentlemen, I'm here to blow this whole Scalper Pandemic thing wide open. There is no silicon shortage, and I'll prove it with facts and logic. I bought myself a graphics card, a real working graphics card, for just under £5. £5 British. What titans of industry, what visionaries, what absolute mad lads are doing this? Well, it's this little company you've probably never heard of called ATI. I've got high hopes for this one. Yeah, alright, so maybe the Radeon HD 4890 isn't a good graphics card, but when I saw it for sale at just £4 delivered, I decided it had to be worth at least a quick look. Naturally, this 2009 former flagship isn't available to purchase brand new anymore. The HD 4000 series was dropped like a hot potato when the 5000 series launched later the same year, offering DX11 compatibility and unheard of performance for the time. This, and the couple of years of rapid development that followed, meant that people were quick to sell Terascale 1 cards and not so quick to buy. So even in the Scalper Pandemic, this card should be pretty cheap. At least, it should be cheap to buy. With a 190 watt power draw and next to no resale value, the only way this could be a worse financial investment is if it were also somehow an NFT. Usually my GPU videos are divided up into two kinds, depending on whether I think it's even worth trying to run newer titles or not. As this card predates DX12, 11 and Vulkan, the question isn't how can this run 2022 games, but rather, if I have one of these cards, what exactly can I play? To answer that, I'll be testing some modern classics from the late 2000s and early 2010s on my moderately priced gaming PC with a Ryzen 5 5600G and 16GB of DDR4 3600. You do not need a setup like this to get the most out of the HD 4890. A quad-core i5 or Ryzen 3 will absolutely be enough to obtain the same kind of frame rates as we're seeing here. While some versions of the 4890 have HDMI ports, the one I have here only had DVI and S-Video, so I used a cheap HDMI adapter from Amazon. DVI can only reliably carry a 1080 60Hz signal, and playing on my 1440 monitor left me with the option of either a soft image with a black border or a heavily compressed image without a border. I chose the former, so things still look how they should, but video quality leaves something to be desired. The most recent release in my benchmark suite today, indie roguelikes like Hades are 10 a penny, but this one in particular had won a shed load of critics awards and seems pretty popular with players too. As an isometric 2.5D hack and slash type of game, it's not particularly intensive, as I found out when testing it on Intel's previous gen UHD integrated graphics. Crucially for my purposes, it's one of the rare modern titles that actually runs on DX10 hardware. At 1080, the game is smooth as butter, averaging 90 FPS with very occasional dips below 50. Truth be told, I'd purposefully steer clear of GTA 5 in my benchmarks. Budget Builds, Random Gaming and Crisp all test it in their videos, and I can't really find anything to say that they haven't already said better. Sometimes, however, I want to make a point. In this case, my point is that you don't need the latest hardware to play some of the best games ever made, and GTA 5 tends to make its way onto a lot of people's top 10s. That's not to say that this is a perfect experience. At 1080 normal, the game struggles to maintain 24 FPS. 720 normal hits the mid-30s and is certainly playable enough for many people, but to get any higher, you're going to have to delve into the config file and turn off the shadows. I'm not an old school AC fan, to be honest. I prefer the open world titles of Origins and Odyssey, and could do with less of the History Channel Ancient Aliens bullshit. This video isn't for me though, and a lot of people regard Assassin's Creed 2 as one of the best games of its kind. The HD 4890 can almost run it at a locked 60 FPS at 1080 max settings, though some early sections in Abstergo drop down into the 30s. Dropping the environment detail to 3 out of 4 helps dramatically. It's still not quite a locked 60, but it's close enough to remain enjoyable. Sticking with the assassination theme, Dishonored is definitely more my pace, coming across in some ways as a modern successor to the Thief series, and bearing more than a passing resemblance to Bioshock Infinite, which was released just a few months later. Again, this one meets two of my main criteria for this video. It's widely regarded as a classic, though more of a cult classic than AC2, and it runs in DX10. At 1080 medium with AA disabled, gameplay runs in the 40s outdoors and mid to high 50s indoors, and there's plenty of room to drop resolution if you wanted to get closer to a 60 FPS average. Skyrim is of course an obvious choice for this GPU. The original version of the game runs just fine in DX10 and has enough content to keep you busy for a while, perhaps until the GPU market sorts itself out. I was pretty cocky with my settings here, choosing 1080 high. Overworld frame rates are in the 30s and 40s and stick close to 60 inside dungeons. City areas will likely see things drop further, so you might want to consider making a couple of sacrifices, either resolution down to 1600 by 900 or quality to medium. Alas, like many older games, the more significant quality settings have to be changed in the launcher before you start, so you can't really change them on the fly. Also, I don't know if this was something specific to my system or the drivers I was using, but I found the frame pacing was absolutely terrible in first person mode, but that it cleared right up as soon as I switched to third person. If you find something similar, weird hitching gameplay even when the average frame rate is in the 50s, try switching viewpoints, it worked a treat for me. A good rule of thumb is that if the game runs okay on the Xbox 360, it should run well on the HD 4890. Arkham City was the last rocksteady Batman game that had a halfway decent PC port, and that means we can run it very smoothly, though ideally at 720. I tried 1080, but it dropped to the low 20s early in my run through, and like Skyrim, these settings are changed in the launcher, so rather than end up having frame rates drop off a cliff at a vital moment, it's probably best to address them ahead of time. If you've got an eye on the forthcoming Gotham Knights or Suicide Squad Kills the Justice League, this might just tide you over in the meantime. My first draft of this script posited that the "can it run Crysis" meme was pretty much dead by now, but then somebody asked about it in my comment section. Thanks for ruining my point there, buddy. Regardless, I've had issues in the past running the base game in Windows 10, so I've saved myself the headache and downloaded the standalone expansion, Crysis Warhead. The answer to the perennial question is yes. Yes, it can. At medium settings, which the game rather scathingly calls mainstream, can you imagine a worse thing to call someone in 2009? It gives an average around 40 FPS. 1% lows are pretty bad, but that mainly comes from the frequent pauses as the game autosaves and loads in new data. Dropping to lowest quality at 1080 actually sees frame rates in the low 100s, though of course you don't get the full Crysis experience. Not gonna lie, me and Dirt 3 don't get on. The steering is twitchy as hell compared to Dirt 5 and the last two Forza Horizons, and it'll take a whole lot of time and effort for me to adjust. That being said, if you're starting from scratch, the level of presentation on this game is excellent, with only the slightly lower res textures and overbearing bloom effect betraying the fact that it's a 2012 game. On the tracks I tested, 1080 medium was sufficient to give a 60 FPS average, though you might want to drop to low in order to improve frame times. Far Cry 3 is a remarkably timeless game, as the basic gameplay feels much like most modern single-player shooters a decade later. The HD 4890 isn't going to give us a super smooth FPS experience here. Depending on the area, some parts of the map can give 60 plus averages at 1080 low, while other, more dense areas with more foliage, NPCs and creatures hang out in the mid-30s. If you're looking for a modern FPS experience on a dated GPU, this is one game to seriously consider. CSGO was the only esports title I had any success with, and thanks to the video linked below from Andy's Tech, I can now actually benchmark it. 1080 low settings felt pretty smooth, and while an 80 FPS average probably doesn't count as competitive, it's possible for casuals to have a good time here. At least insofar as any casual player can enjoy esports. I didn't have too many surprises here. Being limited to DX10 or earlier games, my normal low-spec gaming benchmarks like Valorant and Rocket League were out of the question. According to their current system requirements, Overwatch and Dota 2 should also run fine on the HD 4890, though I don't intend to buy Overwatch, and Dota just isn't my cup of tea. Since Fortnite moved to Unreal Engine 5, it no longer runs on pre-DX11 GPUs. I did try a Fortnite clone called Creative Destruction, and it ran at obscenely high average FPS, but horrifically low minimums. Plus, if you played a mobile shooter like Free Fire, PUBG Mobile or Cyber Hunter, you probably know what to expect here. The UI is very mobile, it doesn't feel quite right compared to the real thing, and the graphics have that weirdly specific free-to-play mobile game look to them. So, my conclusion's pretty clear. I paid £4 for mine, equivalent to less than $6 US, which included shipping and the snazzy aftermarket cooler. It isn't really worth more than about $10 or the equivalent in your local currency, and unless you're in the very specific situation of having nothing better to game with, no flexibility in your budget, and no intention of saving up for something better, you really shouldn't think of buying one. Using the HD 4890 in 2022 is like trapping yourself in a decade-old time capsule. Even the drivers feel like a step back into the bad old days of PC software. Now, me, I didn't play many of these games at the time. I have a gap from 2006 to 2016, during which I didn't play many games, period. If, like me, these games are new to you, you should definitely play them, you won't be disappointed, and the lack of predatory monetization mechanics might make these preferable to later games. But I'm not here to tell you how awesome these games are, I'm here to let you know that they deserve a better GPU than the HD 4890. If you're looking for a reasonably priced alternative that can play all these games and new ones to boot, I have a couple of suggestions on screen and down below. Thanks for watching, kindly do the usual YouTube things if you feel so inclined, and I'll see you next time.